the AL East is definitely the best division in baseball.
You were going to say that, and you're right.
Yeah, it's not particularly close when you think about it.
And you're right again.
Because the worst team in the division, I think we're not going to be previewing our winners and losers, but I think you could say that even right now, what most people would perceive as the weakest team in the division, the Boston Red Sox, would not be the weakest team in just about any other division.
Do you think that in the clubhouse they're going, oh, we're the weakest team in the division?
No.
No, Alex Cotto's not going to let them do that.
Not at all. But yeah, this is a very, very loaded division, top to bottom, with both pitching and mostly, I'd say, the lineups in this division are what really put them over the edge, because they've got, a pretty impressive top 3 starting pitchers in the AL East between Garrett Cole, Kevin Gausman, and Corbin Burns. Those are quite the array of starting pitchers that can.
I tried to go deeper than that, by the way. I tried to go past 3. I had trouble coming up with other starting pitchers, particularly because the Orioles guys are hurt. Kyle Bradish is hurt, so he's not in there. None of the Oriole pitchers, I think, Grayson Rodriguez yet deserve to be.
Carlos Rondon certainly didn't have a year where you could predict him up there.
The Red Sox don't have anybody.
They don't even have a guy that's a number 1.
Exactly. So, and the Blue Jays have Alek Manoah, but he's a number 5 for that team now. He's got a long way to go to get back to being their number 1. Kikuchi, no, he's not one of them. Anyway, so it's interesting, but when we go by division, I could only come up with 3.
Right, but we're going to go to, we'll start with the evil empire themselves, because I think we could argue that at least in the AL East, they made the biggest splash in the offseason by adding one Juan Soto to their lineup. And now they have a 2-3 or a 3-4 combination, depending on how they want to do it, of Soto and Aaron Judge. And yeah, there's only one other team in baseball that can probably pack a 1-2 punch.
That would be the Dodgers.
And that'd be the Dodgers.
Yeah. And I think Soto's in a contract year, and as much as we like to think the guy's going to give it 100%, every time he plays, because that's the way these guys play. And it's not like Soto had a bad year last year, but this guy is poised for just a ginormous year.
And it's just going to be easy for him to flick fly balls out into right field and get cheap home runs with that short Yankee right field porch.
He's watching old film of Roger Maris and Babe Ruth poking him down.
Yeah, I can do that.
Doesn't really look that far.
Right.
So,
hit fly balls out there? Yeah, I can do that all day.
And Aaron Judge, who, I think because of the toe injury last year, we obviously saw a very disabled Aaron Judge, and he said it's something he's going to have to deal with for the rest of his career. This guy, of the 2 players, I think these are both Hall of Fame players.
I think that those are the strengths.
Judge is closer right now.
Right. I think between Judge and Soto, that you can very easily say those are the strengths of the Yankee lineup. The problem is the question marks come in just about everywhere else.
Well, and so if you're going to look at it from the Yankee perspective, right? Anthony Rizzo looks terrific coming into camp. He had a pretty dismal year last year.
Gleyber Torres gives you more than you get out of most second basemen.
Well said.
Anthony Volpe had a very impressive rookie campaign, though you hope he can get the average up a little bit.
Yeah, but hitting 20 home runs, like we always say at shortstop, is going to get you far.
Catcher. They have a catcher.
I just don't understand that. I said this in a recent podcast going, what do the Yankees think? Like, oh, yeah, with a catcher. We keep forgetting about catcher. So,
but there is things that worry me. You have the aged corpse of DJ LeMahieu still.
You're a little harsher about him than I am. I think he's going to be fine. That dude's won batting titles in both leagues.
He's not winning a batting title this year.
No, he's probably not winning a batting title this year.
That's my problem.
And he's going to bat leadoff for
them,
that's
apparently. My problem. He's the guy that is. If he's going to hit. He's got to hit 280 and have an on base of like 380 to 400.
No.
And he's not going to do that.
I was surprised that last year he only had a 334 on base average, because I always remember him being really good.
That's my problem. You have Soto and Judge, and you have a guy in front of him that doesn't get on base, and if he does, he's not particularly fast. That doesn't seem like a great combination to me.
And you've neglected to mention...
And you'd love to have Volpe bat up there, but he hits 230, and he gets only on base at 310.
I think you could expect that Volpe would be better this year than he was last year. The real question mark, I think, that is the swing guy in the entire lineup is Giancarlo Stanton.
Correct, because if he approaches what Stanton can be, he gives them a 1-2-3 punch that actually does rival what the Dodgers have.
And he must have lost 20 pounds or something like that. So he looks ridiculously fit this spring and went through all kinds of flex. This is a guy, as we all know, who gets hurt all the time and knows that everybody is saying you get hurt all the time. Even his general manager says that.
And I think the thing that you worry about with him is he's a big guy that's had a lot of lower body injuries. And those are the kinds of things that don't get better as you get older.
He's also a big guy who, if he has, I think, 4 outstanding seasons, you want to say he's a Hall of Fame candidate.
He's got to have another couple in here.
He's got some all-time stats when you start looking at what he is. So I guess I kind of root for the guy because I feel like it's a guy who works hard. It just hasn't worked out for him because of the injuries more than anything else.
Correct.
The pitching rotation, for them,
Garrett Cole and a bunch of, we really hope it works out.
Well, again, Rodon, another guy who came in ridiculously in shape compared to last year. So I don't know what they were doing last year.
Rodon will be better than he was last year.
Which isn't saying much.
That's not particularly hard. So the question is, how much better? Stroman was a tale of two halves last season for the Chicago Cubs, an all-star in the first half and a guy they didn't want on the field in the second half.
Right. Nestor Cortez, we already talked about him in our prior podcast. I think it's a lot for the Yankees to expect that he's going to have anything close to the year he had 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy with it the year last year. It wasn't that bad. But then you've got Domingo Germán and Clark Schmidt. It's not a starting rotation that inspires a lot of confidence outside Garrett Cole.
If the Yankees want to win both the division and play for the league championship, they need Jordan Montgomery or Blake Snell.
It's an older rotation that doesn't
they have to do it.
And I don't like having Stroman and Cortez together in the same rotation because they seem like very much the same kind of pitcher to me. And we've seen that with the Mets. When you've got very similar pitchers stylistically, it doesn't work out great.
Their bullpen remains a strength, even though they lost Michael King, who is, I think, going to be a starting pitcher now. Clay Holmes, the best closer you've never heard of.
Right.
Tommy Conley, really solid pitcher. Jonathan Lasaga is a terrific pitcher. And so they go pretty deep down with guys. Even Ron Marinaccio, pitched very well for them last year. You can go down the list and come up with other guys.
They used a lot of pitchers last season, but there are also, it means there's a lot of guys that you really don't have a strong, you don't have the 1-2 punch you had last season of Clay Holmes and Michael King. So you're not going to have that same kind of okay, when we really need to reach down and make sure we control this game, we can go to that. You don't have that as much this year, so it'll be interesting to see sort of how they handle that.
And I think the Yankees are hoping that they can patch it together in the outfield with Alex Verdugo until Jason Dominguez. And they're putting a lot of hope and trust in this Jason Dominguez, who played well for 150 at bats last year.
Right.
Looks good in center field. He can go get it and whatnot. But he's
not
going to
that
play for a
unbelievable
while.
start. But then don't ask Yankee fans quite as much about what happened after that unbelievable start.
Peraza's still around. Oswaldo Peraza. Trent Grisham came over in the deal with Soto. Met fans well remember him as a real pain in the neck at the worst possible time. But I still think, overall, the Yankees, if they make that one deal, I think they would be the odds-on favorite. And without it, I'd say that
they're still close.
Neck and neck with
they're
the
still
Orioles.
at the top of. They're still one of the better teams in the division, I'd say. But I think they're going to get a ton of competition from the Baltimore Orioles, who won it last year, and it's very hard to see them not repeating this season.
Well, and I think it's because as much as we say the Yankee 3-4, or if Stanton shows up like they think 3-4-5 is good, the Orioles are kind of good 1 through 9.
Right. What they have is just a deep lineup that where they're not as hurt by if Juan Soto or Aaron Judge misses a bunch of time this year for the Yankees, that's a huge blow to that lineup's overall effectiveness. Whereas if you pull out a piece of the Orioles lineup, it's going to hurt them, but I don't think it hurts them to nearly the same degree as removing Soto or Judge.
And everybody in that lineup last year, except for Jordan Westburg, and who only had 387 at bats, had 17 or more home runs. So some had 26, they had 29. But the point is that they get power from everywhere.
Right, and that's very good when you're in a lineup because it helps kind of insulate you against your home run hitter having a slump. The Mets had periods of times last year where when Lindor and Alonso weren't hitting home runs, nobody was hitting home runs for them. You're not going to have that problem if you're the Orioles because 1 through 9, all of those guys can have power and pop to their bat.
if I was going to be critical of the Orioles at all, I probably would look at their bench and go, they better not get their guys hurt, because the guys they've got on the bench are Ramon Urias had a decent year last year in 275 at bats.
They've got Jorge Mateo and James McCann on their bench. I think that has to worry you, and I think ultimately the Orioles are in sort of a tough position because what bedeviled them and knocked them out of the postseason last year is something that you can't really test until you get back to the postseason. Your bats that were so good for the regular season last year went quiet in the postseason. You're not going to be able to test that particular situation until you get there again.
But so now I think you have the experience.
Right. So you hope with a young team, they're going to be able to maintain their focus this year. And I think getting off to a good start for them, like they did last year, is going to be very important.
That start they had last year was crazy. I don't think you should count on that.
No, but they just need to get off to a good one, because with a young team, that could be a team that could get very frustrated if things don't go well the first month of the season, the first month and a half. That's how you have one of those weird years where you end up with like 85 wins and you're just like, I don't understand how we did this bad. We're better than this.
Now, they lost, as we've said a number of times on this podcast, they lost closer Felix Bautista in late August, and it doesn't look likely that he'll pitch this year. If he does, I guess it would be at the very end of the season, and that's almost the critical thing, because the rest of the bullpen, while it's good, without him isn't as good.
Well, they face the same problem the Mets faced Sans Edwin Diaz last year, where it's the knock-on effect that instead of having Batista, who one sort of just makes you feel like the game's automatically over when you reach the ninth inning, which is just a huge psychological benefit to your team.
They turned it over to Yenny Cano.
But you also run into the issue now that you have to bring up everybody. So the guys that were previous year, your setup guys are your closers now. Your previous guys you would throw in middle innings are now your key middle relievers, and guys you probably didn't want pitching are now the guys you're using in just the random middle innings.
So the solution was bring in Craig Kimbrel as the closer and leave everybody else in the position they were last year.
Which I think is a solid sort of compromise for this season while you're dealing without Batista.
I don't know. Watching Craig Kimbrel pitch is like watching Armando Benitez pitch.
You're always worried.
and Jerry's familiar.
But I don't know.
You're going to be nervous every time he goes out there.
Feel with Yainer Cano or Daniel Colombe in that role.
So bringing in Corbin Burns obviously was a terrific thing for them to do, and they had to do it even more so because
Kyle Bradish is going to be out for a while.
John Means isn't going to. He's still not ready to come back and pitch. And those are two excellent pitchers, and you take them out of any rotation, and all of a sudden,
I trust Corbin Burns. I trust Grayson Rodriguez. But
even Dean Kremer had a nice year for them last year.
Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin are not Kyle Bradish and John Means, so they're going to have to make sure to tread water, and that's why I say.
And that pushes the bullpen down.
Right, that pushes the bullpen's going to be throwing more innings. So the beginning of this year, I think, is going to be very important for this Orioles team to get off to a good start.
But the last thing on them, when you have what their starting nine are Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Anthony Santander, Ryan O'Hearn, Austin Hayes had a nice year last year, Cedric Mullins, one of the most underrated players in baseball, Ryan Mountcastle, and Jordan Westberg. That's a solid 1 through 9 for sure. And they and the Yankees, as you said, I think are the class of the division. The Blue Jays are going to try again.
Well, I think with the Blue Jays, it's like this is sort of the last year that I'm going to believe in this group. They kind of got to find. This is the last year that I'm giving them to put it together, because they can't be the dark horse that's ready to finally take on the AL East. They've been that for like 5 seasons in a row now. You got to put it together at a certain point.
So I want to ask you, when you think of the Blue Jays, do you think of them as a hitting team or a pitching team or a good mix of both or a bad mix of both, if that's the way?
I think you think of them as a team with solid top-end starting pitching, really good hitting, and I have no idea what they're doing on defense. Because that is a rough defensive team.
Well, any team that runs out George Springer in the outfield and leadoff spot's got a good fielder and a guy who's just a really good baseball player. I think that's great. But the other defenders on the team, Vlad Guerrero, even Bichette,
when you look at that
infield,
when you look at this infield, and this is especially, they're very lucky that Justin Turner isn't playing third, because if your infield was Guerrero, Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, and Justin Turner, that might be the worst fielding infield in the major leagues.
Well, instead, they're going to put your favorite player, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, at third base.
Right. And on this team, he at least might get
he's the best defender out there.
Right, so that's certainly going to get him a little bit more. And they've got Kevin Kiermaier in center, and Dalton Varsho, who's a very good defender as well. So those are some plus defenders. But you've got a lot of guys that aren't great defenders around that infield. and that you have to worry about that. And you also worry about the fact that starting pitching was questionable last year outside Kevin Gausman. And are you going to be able to get the performances you hope out of guys like Alex Manoah and Jose Barrios, and even to a large degree, Vlad Guerrero Jr., because he was not the MVP candidate last year. He was
This is a big year for him, right?
He was not good last year.
No, big year for him, and it's interesting to sort of spot him against Pete Alonso as we do on the Mets because they're in the same contractual status right now.
But I would feel so much more comfortable giving Pete a contract than Vlad right now.
Wow, how far has Vlad Guerrero Jr. fallen?
Well, he has not. He's had 2 years in a row, and Pete, it is at least close to a league average defender, where Vlad has a Gold Glove, and that is the biggest question mark Gold Glove I have ever seen somebody win.
His dad was better fielder, for sure.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you're right. And fortunately for them, their pitchers, and you mentioned them.
Their starting pitching is very good.
Bassett also, who had a very good year for them last year. They strike out a lot of hitters, which with those fielders is probably a good thing.
Good, but that bullpen.
Yeah. Well, it's always been about them. I mean, Jordan Romano has, I think, finally gotten to the point where I believe in him as a closer.
Right. I trust the fact that he's going to give me a solid closing effort. Everybody else,
yeah,
a lot of guys named Joe.
Yeah, and they've done the same thing for years by just putting this bullpen out that you just think, okay, do they notice that their bullpen doesn't look very good on paper?
Right, and I think that I ultimately look at this team, and I my biggest issue for them is the lineup so has to overperform. You have to get a year from guys like Alejandro Kirk and IKF that I just don't expect, or Bo Bichette or Kevin Biggio, probably more Biggio, have to all of a sudden take a jump and become a different level player. And all of a sudden they've got now Vlad Guerrero Jr. goes back to what he was, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, now we suddenly have three guys that can rival what, like, say, the Yankees have.
I think you need 150 starts from the five guys, and you're not going to get that.
No.
So that's the problem.
You need Manoah just have his head screwed on straight, too.
Exactly. So, yeah, their bullpen, even with Yimi Garcia and Eric Swanson, who had a nice year. Chad Green moves over there. Always liked him with the Yankees. Good pitcher.
Right,
Nate Pearson, this is the year for Nate Pearson. Oh, he came up with all the accolades and the 100-mile-an-hour fastball and all that stuff. He's, I think he's like 46 now. It feels like he was just, a rookie a couple of years ago. So no, he's one of the more disappointing guys I got to believe in prospect history for the Blue Jays.
Certainly,
he was thought to be that. They list Matt Chapman on the Toronto bench, but he is not a Toronto Blue Jay.
No, I think he's just still listed.
They listed from last year. So David Schneider had a nice year.
Lightning start to last season, but I think that do you really believe you're going to have a guy hit like that for a full season? I don't think so.
Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk are a nice catching combination. They have been for years. They're not. That's not the problem there.
No.
So, but the rest of their bench and Santiago Espinal and Spencer Horwitz, Nathan Lukes. That's Ernie Clement.
Right, but I think if we look at most teams' benches, there's not a lot of benches we're going to look at. We're going to be like, oh wow.
That's probably true. Okay, and so that's three teams, and then we're down to the Rays.
And the Rays are a team where I think, unfortunately, their ability to figure it out and put it all together is just so hurt by the loss of Wander Franco. There's just no way to kind of talk about this
in the lineup itself.
In the lineup itself, the fact that he's no longer part of this team is just such a big blow to their chances of being a real competitor that it doesn't matter that they seem to find some guy out of nowhere to throw 150 innings at a Cy Young level every season. That lineup just, they're pesky, they're solid, but there's nobody that's a superstar.
Wander Franco was a star,
right?
And the problem is that they're going to run out, somebody named Jose Caballero at shortstop this year. Right now, I guess unless the young Taylor Walls takes the job in spring training and runs with it, because there's no way Wander Franco's coming back this season. That's for
right.
sure.
And Arozarena is a very good player. Brendan Lau is a very good player. Paredes had
Yandy Diaz had a great year last year.
Same with him and Isaac Paredes and Jose
Siri is a decent player,
right? But they feel like a lesser version of the Orioles in a weird way.
I know what you're saying.
Like the lineup, it's a solid lineup, but like if I was looking at the lineups 1 to 9 between the Orioles and the Rays, I would take the Orioles lineup over the Rays lineup.
And and the Rays always seem to do it with mirrors and
right, which is why it's hard to at least think they're not going to at least be a pesky solid.
Because every year I do the same thing.
Right,
I underrate them and then they surprise you.
But at the same, and we look at this bullpen. And we go, there's no way. But every year there's some guy that just comes up has like an unbelievable season that nobody can hit out of that bullpen.
Well, and they're going to need it because, so you know who the number one is?
Zach Eflin.
Zach Eflin is their number one because, and that's not,
it's because Rasmussen
should be pitching.
McClanahan is
Shane McClanahan and Jeffrey Springs, who had a great start to last year, all aren't pitching. So that's probably three of the most.
And I think that's one of the reasons
injuries.
why it's hard to believe in them this year and why it's a bleaker forecast for the Rays this year is that you're missing your top 3 starting pitchers. Any team is going to have a difficult prognosis for their coming season if you're missing your top 3 starting pitchers.
And then the weight just goes into the bullpen, right? When that happens, if the guys can't sustain it.
The knock-on effect that it has on your bullpen is devastating and it's insidious because it's not noticeable.
Right.
What you don't realize that you're just draining your bullpen. All of a sudden, now your starters are only going 5 innings in every game, and they're going 5 innings a game in April. So now all your relievers are sitting at 30, 40 innings pitched in like June instead of like August.
Ruh-roh.
And now they're getting all tired earlier. And yeah, they might come back from the break a little bit rested, but then they get into the dog days of August, and your bullpen just dies in that month. Injuries start piling up, and it can just really weigh you down.
In the toughest division in baseball.
Right. And so really for me to really think, for the Rays to have any kind of shining light this year, some other team needs to succumb to the injury bug. If like everybody on the Orioles just goes down with injuries this year and they're playing with half their lineup most of the season, that can open up the door for some of these other teams, I think.
The Rays got off to that crazy start last year, obviously. I think this year, if they're going to be successful, it's going to be the opposite. They're going to have to try to tread water until they get McClanahan or Rasmussen
and have like a 60 and 22 second
just
half.
Come hard at the end and have their guys do it. And that's difficult, too, when you got guys coming off injury to expect it. But I like their pickup of Phil Matone, by the way. I was hoping the Mets
and their
would pick him
bench, I mean, when Ahmed Rosario is your lead bench guy, I think that kind of is all we really need to do when we're talking about your bench.
You know what? I really like him as a bench player. I think
but right. I mean, none of these guys on this bench that you're going to look at. The only guy that's
Caminero, I guess we're hoping for this year, right? Junior Caminero.
I think ultimately for me, I look at them and I go, the only guy that's listed as a bench player that means anything is Wander Franco, and he ain't playing.
Right. And Harold Ramirez is a guy who's has been there a long time, is a consistent contributor for them. But when you see him get 400 at bats or 500 at bats, all those guys sort of happens the same thing is that you get to start seeing their warts when they play that much. So you really don't want them to play that much.
And we get to the final team who, they have a lineup that honestly is better than a lot of other teams' lineups. Across baseball, they have a very impressive, starting offense. The issue is that they also have to throw the baseball to the other team.
Yeah, yes. That's their weakness is that they have to actually pitch.
Right. But that they are too required to, have guys pitch for them.
Let's see. Question number 1 for them right now is Lucas Giolito.
Right, not a good sign. Now, let's start with some positive stuff for this.
So that's not positive, you're saying.
Well, yeah, that's not a great start for them. But let's start with some good stuff, and that would be Rafael Devers and Tristan Casas.
Yeah.
For the Red Sox, they were unbelievable last season, especially Casas in the second half. And he had such a good second half that if he can repeat that between them and Yoshida, and you hope with new pickup Vaughn Grissom, you might put together a really special lineup that could just bludgeon some teams and win you some series.
At the same time, you got Trevor Story out there who batted .236 last year. I don't think you're expecting a resurgence of Trevor Story to come.
And Tyler O'Neill's a nice player, but I mean, how much are you really counting from Weiler Abreu?
And Connor Wong at catcher. So the problem is that it's not the 1 through 9. We
Right.
talked about the Orioles hive. It doesn't have the 3-4 or 3-4-5 that the Yankees kind of have.
It just has the 3-4.
It just has 2 guys and a bunch of bench players who, you probably aren't even that familiar with for the most part. Reese McGuire, Alberto Mondesi, Bobby Dahlback is back again, but he hasn't hit in any other year, so why would this be any different? Rob Refsnyder is still there again.
Hanging around.
So they're a little struggling when it comes to their bench.
And then when we go to I think for the Boston Red Sox, the thing is, the things that help them the most and would change a lot of how we look at this team are still out there. They so desperately need starting pitching, and there are still 2 really big names on the market in Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery, that even though I think they're number 9 in terms of payroll, it's hard to believe that they won't end up with one of those two guys.
Well, if Rafael Devers has anything, you heard what he went off this weekend saying, everybody knows what we need. I know what we need. You know what we need. Let's go get what we need.
Right, and that's
a pitcher.
Right, and that's Rafael Devers saying to the Boston Red Sox, you better go sign somebody or I'm going to walk when my contract
You're
is up.
wasting the best years of this guy's career, who actually is on kind of a Hall of Fame track without anybody knowing about it.
Right. An unheralded player, because if you look outside his shortened 2020 season, these are his last 4 full seasons. 311, 32, 32 homers, 115 RBIs. 280, 38 homers, 113 RBIs. 295, 27, 88 RBIs.
This is not 260, 250,
270,
folks.
33, 100. This guy, year in, year out, is an unbelievable
And he's still
hitter.
pretty young, right?
26. He's going to be 27 this season.
So he has a legit shot.
Right, and this also means he's probably coming up towards the end of his initial rookie contract. He might be a free agent next season in his 28th.
I thought they signed him.
Let's check. I want to check.
I thought they signed him to a longer deal a few years ago, which is why he's so probably miffed that they're not doing, and they've been linked to Jordan Montgomery, just as much as the Yankees have and every other team out there. And I don't know what the poker game is here between these guys, because the Red Sox, pitching wise, otherwise,
he's signed through 2033,
right,
so
right.
he
signed the deal, right? So when they let Mookie go, they decided to put it into Devers,
right? But he's probably getting a little frustrated.
You bet, right? Like Nick Pivetta, nice pitcher. He's your number 2,
right. And I think he was the only pitcher on their staff last season that threw over 150 innings. And that has such, like we've been talking about throughout the rest of this preview, that has such a knock-on effect on the rest of your bullpen. That's why the Red Sox fans are screaming for Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery, and more so Montgomery, because they're like, look, even if Montgomery's not as good as he was last year, he'll throw 180 innings for us, and we need
Giddy up, horsey.
Right, we need a guy we can ride for innings.
Yeah, and the rookie Brian Bello, I know Alex Cora talks about him very, very rhapsodically, how much he contributed last year. It's a lot to expect a guy to just do, he wasn't a heralded prospect. He had a good rookie year, and now you expect him to come out and be that same guy again next year.
You don't really want to be saying, okay, Brian Bello, we need you to go 18-8 and throw 180 innings this season for us to be successful. I mean, we'd love that to happen, but that's a lot of pressure to put on a young guy.
And Cutter Crawford and Tanner Houck. And, I give Tanner Houck a lot of credit because he's fashioned a major league career.
But anytime you're describing a guy like that, you sort of know where he stands as a player.
You had to be thinking, if you're wrestling, going, isn't there anybody else in the organization that we could have gotten? This guy should be like a bullpen pitcher.
But this will be such a fun division to watch this race in, because this will be the most competitive race, most likely. There is a world where a couple of these teams just run away with the division by getting really hot, and they just nobody can ever catch up to them. But we even saw last year with the unbelievable start the Rays got off to, that wasn't enough to keep the Orioles off of their backs. So we should get a really exciting AL East race, and you got to think whoever comes out of that division is going to be one of the favorites to come out of the American League overall.
Just back to the Red Sox for a quick second, and I didn't mention Garrett Whitlock, who pitched a lot of games for this, and is not even projected to be one of the 5 starters. That might be wrong. He might be another one of the starters. But in order for them to go and get a guy like Montgomery, they got a salary cap issue, and they'd have to actually trade Kenley Jansen to get his $18 million off the books.
And then they don't have that's which is why they went and got Liam Hendricks, because they at least got a guy that can fill that role if they get off of Jansen. But who's going to take Jansen?
And I guess you can't, if you're the Red Sox, if you were to trade Jansen, you'd kind of be saying, well, we don't really think we have a chance.
Right, you're kind of you're stuck.
Definitely between a rock and a
hard
hard place.
Or you're going to just have to accept eating some luxury tax stuff.
So the Red Sox will bother teams because Alex Cora, I think, is one of the best managers in baseball, and he will get, I think, the most out of that team. And boys, they're a guy who's going to get a contract if the Red Sox don't lock him up. They're going to have people running to bring him in.
Somebody's going to shell out a lot of money to sign Alex Cora.
But the best division in baseball, where they play 13 games against each other all season long.
And I think the best part about it is, for me, that the Yankee Red Sox series will not be the most anticipated ones this season.
You're a Met fan.